Yeah, the Iron Hands are literally the worst Space Marine Legion, and how these heretically minded lunatics are regarded as loyalists is baffling to me. But regardless of my own personal heresy, bias, let's take a look at the 10th Legion and why they are so awful, horrible, insensitive, and generally regarded as a liability rather than an asset by the majority of Imperial citizens who encounter them. Now, when I think of Space Marines, my mind casts a broader net than just the beefy roid ragers of Warhammer 40k, but they're still the most iconic thing that comes to mind. And when I think of cyborgs, I'm like, I grew up in the 80s, this is my jam. I mean, the only thing even approaching the coolness factor of a cyborg is maybe a ninja. So you'd think that when you add Space Marines and cyborgs together that I'd be all about it, but somehow the Iron Hands chapter is just not as great as the sum of its parts. First off, let me be absolutely clear on this. I love Warhammer 40k, and all the Primarchs and Legions. Hell, every faction pretty much has something fun that I appreciate except Space Clowns. Space Clowns are dumb, even if they are technically part of the coolest Xenos faction in Warhammer. So the love I have for every faction, that does include the Iron Hands and Ferrus Manus, but it does have to be said that they are the ones that I like the least. I find them fun and compelling in the lore as an idea and as characters. I just think they are absolutely awful people and should be regarded as traitors to humanity. Maybe that is their appeal, being the Marines who are actually worse than the Chaos factions but are somehow still loyal. So, these cyborg Space Marines run around the galaxy doing all sorts of nonsense and treating people as if they literally do not matter at all. Everything they do is simply a calculation. Can we win easily? Yes. Then we'll throw some guys at it. Often when the Iron Hands show up to relieve a beleaguered Imperial force, they're regarded as saviors on their arrival, but then often get seen as cowardly and backstabby by the forces they're relieving, who often just get used up as human shields for the Iron Hands to use to soak up bullets. The level of cowardice the Iron Hands bring to the battlefield is only matched by the Night Lords in their own terror tactics. Rather than let the Chaos incursions spilling out of the Eye of Terror gain resources from worlds close to Medusa, the Iron Hands simply exterminatus those worlds to deny any resources to Chaos. The citizenry weren't even considered. The Hands took what they needed, took anyone who was strong enough to become a Space Marine, and then wiped those planets out entirely to create a dead zone around Medusa, making it harder for Chaos to attack them. Countless billions of loyal Imperial citizens died for nothing, to make some cyborg spreadsheet balance better. But this isn't the only heresy they're guilty of. In fact, this barely scratches the surface. The Iron Hands have within their ranks a secret society that holds religious beliefs about their Primarch, Ferrus Manus, the cult of the Gorgon, and they do abominable things. Now, since the Iron Hands are all weirdo, cyborg-obsessed psychopaths fronting like they're just super stoic, they do some weird stuff. Everyone that becomes an Iron Hand has their hand removed and replaced with augmetics. Weird. Creepy, in fact. They obsess on their motto, "The flesh is weak, but deeds endure," but they forget the second part of that motto. The chapter has at times practiced necromancy beyond anything that is allowed by the Imperium. And though every Iron Hand Space Marine wants to be interred into the holy sarcophagus of a dreadnought, not all get to experience that honor. So, they just hack away at themselves until there's little left but a brain and sometimes hearts or other vital organs. Often they will even remove the organs that are what make them Astartes. The Iron Hands are in effect trying to disassociate themselves from their humanity. This is not necessarily a good thing, and this character flaw comes from a place of trauma and torment. You see, the Iron Hands are going through a similar grief to the Blood Angels, but they've been going through it in their own unique way, and processing the trauma of the loss of Ferrus Manus in the way that best suits the Iron Hands. No black rage, no red thirst, just emotional detachment, pure calculative pragmatism, and psychopathic indifference to horrific suffering. The Iron Hands are going through, collectively as a legion, their own mega depression, and they are in 100% absolute denial about it. And what have they done with this instead of self-reflection and betterment? Yep, they've turned their emotions all outward, refined them all down and distilled them into one super fist of hate, and are smacking everyone in the galaxy they come across around with it, including themselves. The Iron Hands, rather than live up to the standards and ideals of their Primarch, decided collectively as a legion to just be a bunch of total dicks. They can't be relied upon to help. They're only out for themselves. They hate the Salamanders because Vulcan survived Istvan along with a few of his Marines, while the Iron Hands suffered greater losses. I mean, if you hate the Salamanders, then there's something really wrong with you. You have to be... well, you have to have a major stick up your ass. I mean, I don't even think Abaddon hates the Salamanders. They're pretty much universally respected, and even Horus wished he could have had them on his side. So yeah, they're super sour and bitter, and just flat out contemptuous. Like the physical embodiment of pursed lips. Just edgy. Like a bunch of kids that had a bad relationship with their parents, then their parents died and they feel bad about it and just keep lashing out. So when Vulcan reunited with the Iron Hands during the Horus Heresy, as he was making his way to Terra with his Draxward, he came across the fleet of Shadrach Medusan. And this guy, he's full cult of the Gorgon and has created a total abomination. So this cult has been making Golas out of dead Marines, which are essentially just AI-assisted dead bodies that are repurposed like servitors. They don't work as good as they did before they died, but the process that the Iron Hands are using is not cool. It was basically just pure heresy. These Marines had their memories, unlike regular servitors, and some lived and died several times. I mean, why wouldn't they? The Legion is a bunch of cyborgs, but they're using AI, and the lives of these Golas are pretty lame. They deteriorate and fail, and it is way worse than being made into a dreadnought. But Vulcan is presented by Shadrach Medusan with a Gola of his brother Ferrus Manus, and the cult of the Gorgon is proclaiming the return of the Primarch. But what the thing is before Vulcan is a janky piece of crap robot hastily thrown together with one of Ferrus's arms duct taped to it. Vulcan smashed it with his hammer and told them off. Honestly, he and his boys should have ended the Iron Hands right then and there, but they didn't have the time for all that, as they were headed to aid the Emperor and fight the traitors during the Siege of Terra. So they were so messed up and regressed deep into themselves so far that they were literally willing to proclaim an arm attached to a robot their father returned. And you know, Ferrus Manus, like many Warhammer fans, just needed a little head, but all he had was arm, and Vulcan obliterated that. His skull is still in the setting though, as Dorn took it from Horus's altar at the end of The End and the Death 3. So, do the Iron Hands have any redeeming qualities? Are they heroic anyway? Are they the most dour, the most sour, and the least empathetic Astartes of all? I say yes to all of those things, of course, but it is the horrible aspects of them that shine so hard, and there's less lore on this Legion and chapter than any other. Ferrus Manus dies in the first book he appears in. And I did gloss over it earlier, but the Iron Hands took that very, very poorly. In fact, they took it as poorly as the Blood Angels took the death of the great angel Sanguinius. So this Legion had a hard time before the death of their father. I'll get to it in a separate video on Ferrus Manus, but because he had necrodermis covering his arms and was capable of amazing feats because of it, the Iron Hands tried to emulate their father. This is when they started focusing only on the flesh is weak part of their motto, and when they started mutilating themselves. Honestly, they probably cut off more than just their hands. I mean, what use does a cyborg space marine have for his junk? Especially when he can upgrade to a cyberdong. And Ferrus didn't like how his sons were mutilating themselves. He hated it. But they kept doing it, which tells me he was kind of hands-off when it came to parenting as far as Primarchs went. I mean, if he would have just put his foot down, then maybe they wouldn't have all become Scientologists. Yeah, the Gorgon thought his sons were too culty. He should have realized that they were depressed. Before he even lost his fat, ugly head, they were deeply depressed kids. I mean, they were super edgy and aggressive, but deep down they just liked hacking off parts of their humanity, both literally and figuratively, to cope with the fact that they were really just redundant and boring. What did the Iron Hands bring that none of the other legions had? Nothing. What did the Primarch Ferrus Manus have going on that no other Primarch had? Nothing. We already had a legion that was a hammer and an anvil. More than one, actually. We already had multiple Primarchs who were masters at smithing and forging and building. Plus, they became obsessed with cyborging themselves into oblivion after Ferrus got his arms covered in necrodermis. To me, looking at this through the eyes of an Inquisitor, I see Ferrus Manus as having been compromised. To allow a Xenos material to remain attached to you is heretical. Ferrus stated that he would one day remove it, but he liked how it gave him strength. He was compromised. It got into him, turning his very eyes silvery. Ferrus Manus was host to Necron technology, and it was a parasite that took him over. It is a good thing, actually, that he lost his head at Istvan. So, his sons, in seeking to emulate this once great and proud demigod, are actually becoming closer to the Necron, to the machine. Funny how every loyalist faction, or at least most of them, have a dark secret that they hide from all the other loyalist factions, that were those other factions to know would lead to total war. I mean, from the Blood Angels to the Iron Hands to the Ecclesiarchy and Lorgar's Lectitio Divinitatis to the Admech and their heretical beliefs, every major Imperial faction has something that makes it fun for all the other factions to declare them heretics for, which sure makes the game more fun. But when it comes to the Iron Hands, I have to say that I have seen fewer Iron Hands models than any other Space Marine army except maybe White Scars, which is a shame because I really do like their simple, utilitarian color scheme. And you'd think that in a miniature war game that there would be more support for cyborg mutant super soldier dickheads who kick everything's ass. In a lot of ways, the Iron Hands are the Caradron overlords of the Warhammer 40k setting. They really just want resources and materials. For the Iron Hands, though, they simply want to upgrade themselves into more metallic, less human versions of their already fully detached selves. Unlike the Iron Warriors, the Iron Hands don't worship chaos, but they probably kill just as many or more regular Imperial civilians. And unlike the Imperial Fists, they aren't truly stoic, as they confused their duty and honor with upgrading their cyberdongs millennia ago and fell into psychopathy. No group of Space Marines in the entirety of Warhammer was in such desperate need of strong guidance and a positive male role model in their lives as the Iron Hands. And it is doubly sad that their father didn't even consider this was a need of theirs, or at least only regarded it as an annoyance instead of addressing his own shortcomings. Yeah, he came up about a head short. Okay, I really don't have any good jokes about this, but I wish I did. Now, I remember saying earlier in the video that despite all the bitching and whining I had done about how much they sucked and they had some good qualities and were a great faction of Astartes too in their own right and were misunderstood, but then I noticed that I fully didn't even say anything about that, and the reason is because, well, I find them really, really boring. I found the best thing they did when I was reading the Horus Heresy was die at Istvan 5. I really liked the Morlocks making their last stand with Ferrus Manus against Fulgrim and the Emperor's Children. That was actually pretty sick. But yeah, they are amazing fighters actually. But what Space Marine isn't? You'd never want to call them for help though. Imagine the scene in Iron Within, Iron Without, where the Imperial Guard calls on the Astartes through some ancient pact from aeons prior through astro-telepathy, and they call the Iron Warriors, who take care of the Dark Eldar but then subjugate the Imperial world. Well, getting saved by the Iron Hands is probably the exact same result. Just in the end, it isn't chaos that is getting the benefit of a world's resources, but a bunch of weirdo cyborg fetishists who want to use the metals on your world to manufacture more arms and make their cyberdongs bigger. Will I ever let this go? No. It's hilarious to me. So anyway, that is the Iron Hands and why I hate them. I think they should be declared excommunicatus traitoris for how they treat the Imperium, or they should actually do their jobs and be the Emperor's angels of death, not just some cyborgs who hate everyone. If you've seen the Black Templars episode of If the Emperor Had a Podcast, then you'll know what I'm talking about. They need to be reined in. Imagine fighting in the trenches with your gas mask and your shovel, and you've been fighting off orcs for months. Reinforcements finally show up and it's the Iron Hands, who just because they're them, stand behind you and your men, driving you forward into the enemy as a human meat shield to soak up incoming fire. Then as you and your men are broken and discarded, they roll their tanks over the orcs, take all the glory, claim your world, put 1 in 3 of your loyal soldiers who survived to death for even letting orcs come around in the first place, take all the world's resources, and the captain in charge melts down your grandfather's trench shotgun and your shovel to extend his own personal cyberdong, despite the fact that the captain is just a brain in a jar controlled by forbidden AI. But hey, the Imperium is beleaguered on all sides, so we'll take what we can get. Yeah, screw the Iron Hands. It's one thing to be heartless, merciless, and cold-blooded. It's another thing to actively strive to be a robot while condemning people who are flesh. While being an establishment that was put in place to protect flesh people, it doesn't make any sense. I say, take the cartridge out and blow in it. This Legion needs to be reset.